Thank you, Samir. There, stay with us. We're opening up now. Major General Mats Engman, we have a question from Hermine Schellen, which I'd like to also widen out into that question about whether the Korean situation can learn anything from Europe's experience. The question from Hermine is there a way to build a bridge of peace between North and South Korea?
Yes, thank you very much. First about this, what can Europe bring, or what can the Korean Peninsula learn? Of course, there are things they can learn. I mean, we have a long history and a lot of experience, especially on, let's say, the more practical level, and especially in the field I've been working, which is military risk reduction and confidence building. I mean, we have had a string of activities, negotiations, implementations. So there are a lot of experience that could be not copycat, but made in a let's say, Korean style version. And just to mention an example, if you look closely and read the Comprehensive Military Agreement from 2018, it's a lot of things in that you could also find in the Vienna documents and the Helsinki peace process. So a lot of things has already been applied. So that's one. I think there are things that could be applicable and they could use, but they need to be, of course, updated to fit the Korean Peninsula and the current geopolitical context. On the question of building a bridge, I'm an optimist, so I would say in the long run, yes. But with as I said in my introduction, under the current geopolitical environment, I don't see it happening. And I don't see it happening because North Korea will not come to the table. And the price they are asking for to come to the table, which is, don't talk about denuclearization, is not the price that especially the United States is willing to pay at the moment. So yes. I'm very pessimistic about the opportunities in the short period, but maybe in the long term. May I also make a comment on something Dr. Puri said about managing conflicts?
Oh, yes, please.
And not solving conflicts. I was deployed on the peninsula in August 2015. And I think that's the closest we have been to an all-out war on the Korean Peninsula. And it was only, I would say, because of a few individuals that was cool-headed and experienced that a sudden escalation was avoided. There were a couple of 3-4 days where there was an extreme activity going on, a lot of heightened tension, raising of readiness on military units, artillery pieces being redeployed and ready to fire on the northern side. And this was after, if you remember, the mine accident in August of 2015. So managing risks also comes with a risk. And if there are the wrong people at that particular time, it can go very bad.
And when something like that happens, you might have the cool military heads, the civil service heads perhaps, but yep. When that goes upstairs to the president or the prime ministers, are the heads less cool, more politically orientated, less pragmatic, as Samir Puri was saying?
Would you address that?
No, I'm saying the cool heads, you can often have cool military heads during a crisis for a bit of time. But when it gets up to the White House, say with President Trump in, or somebody that has got a political reason for doing something rather than keep the peace, do we have a bigger problem?
Yeah, but one of the experience and lessons I've learned over my years is the best preparation for having a kind of cool system and not just cool heads is that you have had this constant exercises and training where you have interaction between the senior political leadership and the senior military leadership. So you over time build trust between the two. And that is something that is maybe unique for the Combined Forces Command and its relation to the Blue House and the White House.
Okay.
Thank you.
And would similar systems be there on the Russian and Chinese sides?
I don't see it on either side being as well developed because the two systems are very authoritarian, because this system requires an openness and acceptance of difference of mind, dialogue, discussion, and I don't see that happening in those two systems.
Okay, so that's...
And also, I mean, there are some militaries in Western Europe that do have the same kind of system, the UK, for instance, France and Germany.
We have a question from Sally Ann Franklin that I'll put to Samir Puri and then back to you, Mats Engman. If future East Asian security policy has a lot to do with past wars have not been resolved, e.g. China and the Korean Peninsula, how can looking at this in more detail by all parties show a way forward? Looking at things in more detail. Samir Puri.
That's a great question. I think one of the sad things in the world of conflicts is sometimes the more you look into the history, the more people find they have to disagree. That's a sad thing. And clearly responsible history telling and mediation through actual narrative building tries to emphasize, the commonality in people's roots and the importance of actually coming together to be able to move forward. But with regards to the Korean Peninsula, I think the depth of the dispute was so severe, and the Cold War context was actually quite overbearing, given the role, clearly the direct role that Mao played and the role that clearly Stalin also played indirectly, as well as the US. And I think that the real difficulty now is that there's geopolitical ruptures that are happening. People call a new Cold War. I don't like that term myself. But it means that looking into the history can sometimes be just as divisive. Where I think there is the possible scope is looking into commonalities in culture. And again, one cannot be overly general in these things, but I think the idea of the Korean people and their different history, different phases of history during which time they've actually got strong connections with each other that predated or transcended divisions is surely going to be the bedrock of any ability, not now, but in a future iteration, a future incarnation, to move the situation in a very positive direction.
Right. So looking looking into more into too much detail can actually increase the increase the problems. Matt Engman, do you agree with that? Oh, Matt, you are muted. Everybody seems to be muting themselves. Yeah. Thank you. Samir, you can unmute. I might bring you back in.
Yeah. No, I think, of course, history can learn, but I think I do agree with Dr. Puri that the more you study history and you're more engaged in history, there is a risk that you develop more entrenched positions because of some of the atrocities that resurface. And I think we can see very clearly how both Xi Jinping and President Putin uses historic narratives to support their current policy. And those historic narratives are, I'm not an historian, but from what I understand, they pick and choose what part of history they would like to promote in order to fortify and reinforce their messages. So I think the historic narratives is something that needs to be used by caution.
Yes, of course, because South Korea and Japan, the two military stalwart allies of the US, haven't sorted out their narrative or the way it goes forward. They're beginning to. Michael Balcom has an interesting question here. Some Koreans who still believe in the possibility of unification look back to the astonishing reunification of Germany in the year following the fall of the Berlin Wall as the sign of what could yet be in Korea. What do the panelists see as the key reason as to why the Berlin model does not apply in Korea, if that's what they think? Could it ever have applied or be applied? And if I could add one to that, is that Albania has come out of its dictatorial hermitage with the beacon of the European Union. Would there be a similar beacon in East Asia that could bring North Korea out? Matt Engman, take that, and then let's hear from Samir Puri.
Yes, maybe if I would like to highlight two reasons, I think, why the, let's say, the German unification is not applicable to the South Korean, North Korean case. First of all, North Korea still enjoys a superpower major support, and a superpower that doesn't want to see unification happening. They don't like to see US troops in the northern part of the peninsula. So that is one of the key reasons. The other key reasons has to do with when North Koreans talk about unification, it's a different concept from when South Koreans talk about unification. Because from a Seoul perspective, it's the introduction of liberal democracy and market economy, which would be very much detrimental to the Kim families to remain in power. So when North Koreans talk about reunification, it's to introduce a socialist model on the peninsula. So they talk about two extremely different concepts.
Yes. Samir?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? Because actually the reunification of Germany is a phenomenal accomplishment given the depth of the dispute and the World War II situation that led to it. So on the one hand, there is some sense of a wartime division that has persisted for decades that has actually come down. But I totally agree with Mats's point about the fact that obviously the USSR, the sponsor of East Germany, collapsed. And that just, there's no parallel here. The other thing I think that is very, very important is that there was a real sense in the 90s of geopolitical optimism. There was a so-called peace dividend. There was a quite favorable overarching context within which the two Germanys reunified. And then all the difficulties that West Germans in particular had at an economic level of part subsidizing the reabsorption, given how impoverished the East German economy was. I'm being very simplistic in my language here, so forgive me, but just the fact it takes time to make that reunification actually work. You don't only need the favorable situation on the Korean Peninsula to have a reunification, you also need to safeguard that critical several years afterwards. And we're nowhere near anything like that sort of sense of optimism or mutuality of support, because there's still an ambition to remove US troops from south of the division, from South Korea, held by the Chinese. And they will be evaluating the Russian move on with regards to North Korea, I think, in that regard, for sure.
It seems as this debate is developing that we're very much caught that North Korea, whatever it wants or doesn't want to do, is really caught in a superpower struggle, like many countries around the world, except it's a nuclear-armed weapon state, albeit rudimentary. Gudrun Hassanen, it seems to me that the two Koreas also need to find channels to communicate among themselves, and not first and foremost wait for and rely on supportive big powers. Is there no way for direct contact, be it among cultural organizations, women, scientists? And I'll add to that, is there the will to do it between the two, or would they be stopped by the relative powers that be? Mats Engman?
From my knowledge, there are still a very, very few, let's say, joint activities being conducted between North Korea and external partners. I know of one where there is a UK university involved in doing volcanic research, which is still ongoing, as far as I understand. So there are some small, bridges of contacts, personal contacts between North Korean and the outside world. When it comes to contacts over the border between North and South, as far as I know, there is nothing. Not even the military hotlines are up and working. The North Korean doesn't respond when the call is made. So there is, and also from a lot of the interaction that I've experienced with North Korea and also from their official policies, they don't want to talk to South Korea because South Korea cannot deliver what they want.
Okay.
They want to talk to United States. Yeah. Because one of the key objectives in any discussion on, let's say, peace and stability in the peninsula is security guarantees to North Korea and its regime. And that is something South Korea cannot deliver.
So I just said the security guarantees. Am I right in thinking, which I've heard from Pentagon analysts, you would know, is that if North Korea did use a nuclear weapon in a hostile way, it would be obliterated pretty much immediately by the US, and that is in Kim Jong-un's mind, that if he presses that button, he dies.
Yeah, I think that's the calculus, and that's also what the whole extended deterrence policy aims to make reliable, that a use of nuclear weapons by North Korea would be retaliated with nuclear weapons from the United States.
Except now, with the peace agreement or the defense agreement with Russia, that narrative changes slightly. As Samir, if we can get back to Gudrun Hassanen's question, is there a way for direct contact? To be, and if you could remind us, wasn't there a joint sort of factory complex in Kaesong in the south, which was shut down several years ago, and that was the great hope that this could happen.
Yeah, and again, not having a detailed view on sort of the sociological developments in Korean society, the one thing I'd say is that obviously most of the material we read from North Korea is people who've defected or who have left, or who are in other ways sort of exiles, which is it's a really difficult start point from which to actually penetrate the Iron Wall. Again, North Korea, it's a poor country, but it spends one of the largest percentages of its GDP on defense. It is, and as Mats is saying, it's a totally fixated on regime protection. So any action that one would take, even at a civil society level, to reach out to North Koreans very generally, would be interpreted by the regime on the basis of does this or does this not enhance the stability and security of our regime domestically and internationally. Mm. And it's very, very impenetrable, and it's becoming more impenetrable given the Russia and the China angles that mean that they will have top cover against any initiative that actually tries to force a situation in which they have to make compromises.
Actually, I mean, even in the past few weeks or a few months, it has got, I think, as Mats Engman said at the beginning, it has become more pessimistic. Michael Balcom has come back with an interesting question. With the apparent failure of sanctions against both North Korea and Russia, should the West face up to the fact that sanctions are no longer effective as a means of coercion, as if they ever were? If so, what should replace such measures? Mats Engman.
I think the West should realize that the sanctions in place on North Korea has a limited effect. It's not useless. It makes life difficult, and it provides some kind of restrictions what they can do and what they cannot do. So I don't think you should take away sanctions, and sanctions would, if there would be a diplomatic solution, then sanctions will be one of these bargaining chips. I don't think they should go away, but relying on sanctions to solve the major issues, I think is a little bit wishful thinking. So I think also that with the new relations with Russia, the sanctions will be even more difficult to impose, because there is and we have already heard and read about opening up of direct railway lines between eastern Russia and northern North Korea.
Samir, it's the case on the sanctions thing. Is it the case that any hope that there was that North Korea could go through a China kind of path to improve its economy and therefore improve the contact with the West, and that path to sort of not democratization but to opening up, that has been killed by sanctions, hasn't it? Because nobody can do business with them, certainly from the West.
Yes, and yes, I'll come to that in 1 second, but also the overarching question that was posed in the chat. You know, I think that there's been a watershed moment, given that the sanctions against Russia neither failed to deter Russia's invasion, the threat of them, and the reality of them has not compelled a reversal in Russia's invasion. And there's one really big lesson, I think, from that for sanctions writ large, and that does bear down on North Korea. And I write about this in my new book, which is because it's called Westlessness. I'm looking at the changed role of the West in relation to the rest of the world. And part of this Westlessness thesis is actually that there's no more devil in the detail of sanctions evasion with regards to Russia's survival as an economy than it is Russia riding the wave of the changing structure of the global economy, in which the G7, think about the start of the six-party talks 20 plus years ago in North Korea. The G7 held about 65% of the world's GDP. It holds, I think, 40 something percent, 47 or 8% now. And it's projected to drop even further. This is not a sanctions evasions point. This is a point about what are the actual implications for geopolitics and conflict resolution of the rise of Indonesia, the rise of India, rise of China, when those sovereign governments are entitled to take different perspectives on a war or a conflict to the Western countries. Just very quickly with North Korea, you know, it will see its relationship with Russia as a way in, and now, of course, it has its alliance with China. Is this a way into the BRICS? Because you also, I think, very importantly mentioned Iran. And Iran is now part of the BRICS. So there are parts of sort of the structure of the global economy and the global geopolitics, which are actually quite novel to the 2020s. And a so-called pariah regime has different options to when the US hegemony and power was relatively undisputed.
Yes, that's, I mean, that is a fascinating, and this seemingly fashionable policy of the global South, backed by India and backed by Vietnam, obviously, of multipolarity, whereby when the West comes or China comes and says, you have to take our side or this is going to happen, they're saying, no, not anymore. And Vietnam in the past few months has had Joe Biden, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin all signing increased defense agreements or relationship agreements. Can I finish with a question from Angret Landwehr? It's a sort of, the German Revolution started with people wanting more freedom. Is that a possibility that these sentiments they're being repressed in North Korea? Could that break out? Could there be a people power revolution there? Do we want one? Matt Engman?
Yeah, I would say no.
No, we don't want one, or no, it won't happen.
No, we would like to have one that is controlled. The problem is, how do you control a popular revolution in a society with North Korea where you don't have any institutions that we would normally refer to? But I can give you two recent examples. One of the things that makes the North Korean leadership so nervous about the leaflets and the balloons from South Korea and the loudspeaker operation is because of it jeopardizes the legitimacy and the standing of the ruling elite. So they are extremely sensitive to any kind of infringement in their total control of the society and the total control of information and the flow. And there are so many numerous examples on how they manage to crack down and control even the smallest little device of a South Korean soap opera or K-pop or what have you. So
sorry to interrupt, because we are out of time. I've just looked at the watch. Can you just sum up for us in one sentence if your mind has changed at all in this debate, or if you remain as pessimistic as you did at the beginning, Mats?
I'm sorry, I'm still very pessimistic that we in the short time will have any kind of engagement with North Korea.
Samir Puri, your final thoughts.
Yeah, in one sentence, I'm glad you mentioned South Korean soft power and K-pop, because I'd probably say it's having a bigger impact in the West and other parts of Southeast and East Asia than it would be in North Korea. Because we actually hear it, and it's become very fashionable for young people. And that in itself conveys, I think, the sheer difficulty of actually getting messages to the public. If you can't speak to the public except for people who've left and escaped North Korea, then how on earth can you engender a grassroots civil society level movement to ask for some kind of thawing or opening. That route doesn't really exist.
And that goes to show that this very closed hermit society, it has not been broken up, that unlike Eastern Europe, unlike other dictatorships. Thank you both for that.